Poverty is a mindset that gets passed down like a family heirloom. That's a controversial thing to say, I know. But stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you in the next 20 minutes might completely change the way you think about money, success, and why some people seem to stay stuck no matter how hard they try. This video isn't about blaming poor people. It's not about politics. It's not about privilege versus hard work. It's about something far deeper. The invisible psychological patterns that get wired into our brains during childhood, and how those patterns silently dictate every financial decision we make as adults. We're going to talk about real science, real psychology, and real stories. And by the end, you'll understand something that most people, rich or poor, never stop to think about. Here's a question most people never ask. If you gave $1 million to someone who grew up in poverty, would they still end up broke 5 years later? Studies suggest, shockingly, yes. A huge percentage of lottery winners go broke within 3 to 5 years. And it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're lazy. It's because the way they think about money hasn't changed. The number in their bank account changed, but their mindset didn't. So what exactly is a money mindset? It's the collection of beliefs, fears, habits, and emotional responses you have around money. And here's the terrifying part. Most of those beliefs were formed before you were 10 years old. Before you could even tie your shoes properly, your brain was already being programmed. Let that sink in. Psychologists call it the scarcity mindset. It's a mental state where your brain is so focused on what you don't have that it becomes nearly impossible to think clearly about anything else. Researchers at Princeton and Harvard did a fascinating study on this. They found that when people feel financially stressed, even temporarily, their cognitive function drops by the equivalent of losing 13 IQ points. 13. It's like operating in a constant mental fog. People in scarcity mode make worse decisions, take fewer calculated risks, and focus almost entirely on short-term survival rather than long-term growth. And here's the thing. Once you grow up in that environment, the scarcity mindset doesn't just disappear when the money problems do. It becomes your default way of thinking. It becomes who you are. Let's go back to childhood for a moment. Imagine you're 6 years old. Every time you ask for something, a toy, a snack, new shoes, you hear the same thing. We can't afford that. Or money doesn't grow on trees. Or rich people are greedy. These aren't just throwaway phrases. To a child's brain, these are facts about how the world works. Your brain at that age is like a sponge. It absorbs everything without filtering it. And what it absorbs becomes your programming. Neuroscience tells us that the beliefs formed in early childhood create literal neural pathways, grooves in your brain that become your default thought patterns. So if you grew up hearing that money is scarce, that wanting more is selfish, or that people like you don't get ahead, your brain built a motorway around those beliefs. And by the time you're an adult, driving down that motorway feels completely natural. It feels like truth. Here's where it gets really powerful and a little heartbreaking. Poverty thinking isn't just personal. It's generational. It gets transferred from parent to child not through genes, but through behavior, language, and environment. A parent who grew up in survival mode teaches their child, often without realizing it, to survive, not to thrive. They model anxiety around money. They celebrate safety over ambition. They warn their children about risk rather than teaching them how to manage it. And that child grows up, becomes a parent, and does the exact same thing. Not because they're bad parents, because they're human. We teach what we know. We pass on what we were given. This is why poverty can persist across 3, 4, even 5 generations in the same family, not because of a lack of opportunity alone, but because of a deeply embedded psychological framework that makes opportunity feel dangerous. Let's talk about stress, because this is where the science gets really eye-opening. When you're living in chronic financial stress, your brain operates in what scientists call survival mode. Your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fear and threat detection, is constantly activated. And when the amygdala is running the show, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, reasoning, and impulse control, takes a back seat. This means that people in financial poverty literally struggle more with long-term thinking, not because they're incapable, but because their brain is wired right now, today, for immediate survival. Think about it this way. If you're drowning, you're not thinking about swimming lessons for next month. You're thinking about the next breath. Financial stress works the same way. The problem is, staying in survival mode permanently makes it nearly impossible to ever build a better future. There's a psychological concept called learned helplessness, and it might be the single most powerful force keeping people trapped in poverty. It was discovered by psychologist Martin Seligman in the 1960s. He observed that when animals and people are repeatedly exposed to painful situations they can't control, they eventually stop trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. In the context of poverty, this looks like this. You try to get ahead. It doesn't work. You try again. Still nothing. You try a third time. Something knocks you back. Eventually, your brain concludes, there's no point. Nothing I do makes a difference. And that belief, even if it was once true, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Opportunities appear, but you don't see them. Doors open, but you don't walk through them. Because somewhere deep in your psychology, you've already accepted that it's not for you. Let me introduce you to one of the most overlooked reasons people stay poor. Identity. Not income, not education. Identity. Here's what I mean. If you've grown up poor your entire life, if everyone around you is poor, if your family is poor, if your neighborhood is poor, then at some point, poverty stops being your circumstance. It becomes your identity. And this is incredibly dangerous. Because we are psychologically wired to stay consistent with our identity. It's called identity-based behavior. If you believe deep down that you are someone who is bad with money, you will subconsciously behave in ways that confirm that belief. You'll overspend. You'll avoid saving. You'll self-sabotage right before a breakthrough. Not out of weakness, but out of an unconscious need to stay true to who you believe you are. This brings us to self-sabotage, and this one is really important. Have you ever seen someone get a windfall, a bonus, an inheritance, a business breakthrough, and then almost immediately blow it? That's self-sabotage in action, and it's more common than you think. Here's the psychology behind it. If your internal thermostat, your subconscious set point, is calibrated to a certain level of income or success, your brain will do everything in its power to return to that level. Just like a thermostat brings a room back to its set temperature when it gets too hot or too cold, success beyond your set point doesn't feel exciting. It feels threatening. It feels wrong. It feels like you've gone too far, stepped out of line, broken some unspoken rule. And so the brain finds ways to bring you back. Overspending, giving money away, making impulsive decisions. It's not stupidity. It's deeply ingrained psychological programming protecting your sense of self. Now, Let's talk about something that the modern world has made 10 times worse: comparison. Social media has created what psychologists call relative deprivation. This is the feeling of being poor, not in absolute terms, but relative to the people around you. You might have food, shelter, and basic needs met, but if everyone you follow online is showing off luxury holidays, designer clothes, and dream homes, your brain registers a threat. And that threat triggers the exact same scarcity response as real poverty. This is why people who are technically financially stable still feel desperate, still make poor financial decisions, and still can't seem to get ahead. They're constantly running from a feeling of not enough. And that feeling, not the actual numbers, is what drives the behavior. In 1972, psychologist Walter Mischel ran what became one of the most famous experiments in history, the marshmallow test. Children were offered 1 marshmallow now, or 2 marshmallows if they could wait 15 minutes. The children who waited, who demonstrated the ability to delay gratification, went on to have higher academic achievement, better health outcomes, and higher incomes as adults. Now, this study has been debated and nuanced since then, and rightly so, because follow-up research showed something crucial. Children from unstable environments were less likely to wait, not because they lacked willpower, but because they had learned from experience that promises aren't always kept. If your world is unpredictable, taking the bird in hand makes perfect rational sense. The tragedy is that this perfectly logical survival response becomes a liability when the environment changes, but the behavior doesn't. Here's something that will genuinely blow your mind. Being poor is cognitively expensive. That's not an insult. That's science. Think about all the mental energy required to manage poverty. Juggling bills, deciding which necessity to sacrifice this month, worrying about unexpected expenses, calculating whether you can make it to payday. All of that takes up enormous mental bandwidth. And mental bandwidth is finite. When your brain is consumed by financial stress, there's simply less capacity left for everything else. Creativity, planning, learning, problem solving. This creates a vicious cycle. Poverty drains the mental resources needed to escape poverty. It's not a character flaw. It's a cognitive trap. And it explains why simply telling someone to work harder or make better choices while they're in survival mode is, frankly, completely unhelpful. Every one of us is walking around with a subconscious rule book about money, and most of us have never read it. These are the unspoken beliefs that run in the background of every financial decision you make. Things like, rich people are corrupt, money changes people, I don't deserve to be wealthy, if I have too much, others will have less, success will make me lose my friends, I'm not smart enough to be wealthy. These beliefs feel like common sense. They feel like wisdom, but many of them are simply stories we inherited from our parents, our culture, our religion, our community. And here's the critical point. You cannot consistently behave in a way that contradicts your deepest beliefs. Until the belief changes, the behavior won't. And until the behavior changes, the outcomes won't. Let's flip the script for a moment. What do wealthy people, not lucky people, not inherited wealth people, but genuinely self-made wealthy people, think differently? First, they think about money as a tool, not a destination. Second, they think long-term. They're comfortable delaying short-term pleasure for long-term gain. Third, they have a fundamentally different relationship with risk. They don't see risk as something to be avoided. They see it as something to be calculated and managed. Fourth, they believe that wealth is learnable. They approach financial literacy as a skill, not a talent you're born with. Fifth, and this is the big one, they see failure as feedback, not as proof that they don't belong. That last one is huge, because failure in a scarcity mindset means, I knew it, I'm not meant for this. In an abundance mindset, failure means, that didn't work, what do I do differently? The term abundance mindset gets thrown around a lot, and it's become a bit of a cliche. So let me be clear about what it actually means. It doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It doesn't mean thinking positively while ignoring reality. The abundance mindset is simply the belief that resources, money, opportunity, knowledge are not fixed, that there is enough, that your gain doesn't have to be someone else's loss.
That tomorrow can be different from today. In a scarcity mindset, life is a zero-sum game. If you win, I lose. So why even try? In an abundance mindset, life is positive sum. Your success doesn't threaten mine. It inspires it. And that single shift in belief changes everything. It changes the questions you ask. It changes the opportunities you see. It changes the actions you take.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds good in theory, but can a mindset that was wired in over decades actually change? The answer, backed by neuroscience, is yes. And the word for it is neuroplasticity. Your brain is not fixed. It's not a static machine. It's a living, adaptable organ that is capable of rewiring itself at any age. New neural pathways can be built. Old ones can weaken. But here's the honest truth. It takes time. It takes repetition. And it takes deliberate, consistent effort. You cannot meditate away 20 years of scarcity programming in a weekend. But you can, gradually, persistently, replace old patterns with new ones. It starts with awareness. You can't change what you don't recognize. And that's exactly what this video is designed to do. So, let's get practical. Here is the first thing you can do, starting today, to begin shifting your financial mindset. Audit your money beliefs. Take a piece of paper or open your notes app and write down every belief you have about money. Don't censor yourself, just write. Money is. Rich people are. I am someone who. My family always. When you're done, go through the list. Ask yourself for each belief, where did this come from? Is it actually true? Is it serving me? Some beliefs will be worth keeping. Many won't. This isn't therapy. It's awareness. And awareness is always the first step to change. The simple act of writing these beliefs down and looking at them objectively gives your rational mind a chance to evaluate them for the first time instead of just running them on autopilot. Here is practical step 2, and this one is powerful. Change your inputs. Jim Rohn said it best. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your environment shapes your thinking profoundly and constantly. If everyone around you has a scarcity mindset, that mindset gets constantly reinforced. So consciously and deliberately change what goes into your brain. Listen to podcasts by people who think differently about money. Read books, not get-rich-quick books, but books about financial psychology, mindset, and real wealth building. Spend time, even virtually, around people who are where you want to be. Watch interviews with self-made people, not to copy their tactics, but to absorb how they think. This is called vicarious learning, and it's one of the most powerful tools for rewiring a belief system. The third step is about identity, and it's deceptively simple. Start taking small actions that are consistent with the identity of who you want to become. Not who you are, who you want to become. If you want to become someone who is good with money, start tracking your spending for 1 week. That's it. Not investing thousands, not starting a business, just tracking.
Because every time you take that action, your brain collects evidence that I am someone who pays attention to money. And over time, that evidence accumulates. That identity begins to shift. This is the concept of identity-based habits, made famous by James Clear in Atomic Habits. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. So the work isn't about doing more. It's about becoming someone different. One small action at a time.
Here's what I want you to take away from everything we've covered today. If you grew up in poverty, if you're currently struggling financially, it is not your fault that you were given a certain kind of programming. You didn't choose your childhood. You didn't choose the beliefs that were installed in you before you were old enough to question them. But here is what is absolutely true. You are not your programming.
You are the person who can read this programming, question it, and choose to rewrite it. That is not a small thing. That is everything. The path forward isn't easy. It isn't quick, and it isn't a straight line. But it starts with understanding, really understanding, that the barrier between where you are and where you want to be is less about money and more about the story your mind tells you about money. Change the story.
And everything else begins to change with it. If this video made you think differently, even just slightly, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. It might be the most valuable thing you do for them today.